Welcome everyone to our next Wi-Fi Lifecycle Series webinar. And this is where we're going to actually get in depth of troubleshooting or defending your castle from interferes. Now, this is kind of our part 2 series of what we were looking at, what we did last, what did I say? Was it 2 weeks ago, Tawny, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Where we went into kind of understanding kind of the nuances of working with the actual frames and understanding what's going on deeper inside that the level. But today we're going to take a different approach, and we're going to look at the interferes from the spectrum point of view. We've got a great guest on here today. He's no stranger to Ekahau and the show, and he's a personal friend of ours, and that is none other than
Jim Palmer. Jim Palmer. Welcome.
So,
we're so excited to have you, Jim.
Thanks.
Yes, very much. Thank you. And thank you for coming on today, because this is actually a lot of fun. And we immediately thought of Jim because, not to steal some of Jim's thunder, but a little bit of background for the folks is when I really first met Jim was at a WLPC event, and he brought this massive spectrometer, like it looked like a military device, right? It had a massive antenna on it. You could see what was going on, and it was cool. And I think he was actually going to set up like a full-on ham radio site there. It looked pretty slick. You got my attention. Still, do you still have that device?
Oh no! And it wasn't big physical wise.
But it was
a Field Fox handheld spectrum analyzer that I had, and that the cost on that was about $30,000 US. So no, Jim didn't get to keep that one. Jim had to
sorry. Well, you know what, that one did probably a great deal different type of analyzing, but we're going to talk a little bit more about what makes kind of looking at the spectrum and getting your kind of your take on it, and I know you spend a lot of time in that sector and working in environments where interference was a cause of issue, right?
Well, and before we do that, we'll let Jim introduce himself, because some of you may not know Jim.
That's right.
So we'll let Jim has had many roles here in the wireless industry. So we're really, like as Stu said, really excited to have him. So Jim, welcome, and we'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourself.
So hi, my name is Jim Palmer. I'm a radio guy. You can probably see all my radios down here and APs up there, but I actually started in two-way radios back in the early 90s with the military. And so I kind of came through two-way radio stuff, and then kind of got bored, found out about Wi-Fi and said, hey, well, let me try some Wi-Fi stuff. So that's how I got into it. I'm a CWNE, Ekahau master, just all around radio nerdy guy. And yes, I didn't pitch for the Baltimore Orioles, although I did get in trouble by claiming that one time. And Rodolfo, you better not say anything, Rodolfo. My hobbies are shoveling snow and mitigating flood waters from the melting snow. So that's what I do for a living.
Awesome. And before we jump into talking about our fun topic for today, we have a poll question for you guys. Stu, cue my Jeopardy music.
You bet. I'm cueing it. The volume should be up and cranked.
And get that answered. I feel confident I can identify spectral interference. True or false? And Jim, I'm sorry, but you can't answer.
Oh, I would answer false.
You don't say that.
Maybe you should have asked that before you asked me to be on there.
And he kids, folks, just so you know. All right, just another couple seconds in there. And let's go ahead and end that. And I'm going to share the results. So that's quite a big gap. Majority of folks, 54, more than half, says spectral interference is a challenge. And it is. And so, which coincidence, that's what we're talking about today. So for those of you who said false, get ready. We're going to have some fun and look at some live examples. So troubleshooting, before we jump into specific spectral interference, what is the challenge, Jim? Why is troubleshooting just such a challenge for folks in general?
You know, I think the biggest problem is knowing where to start with troubleshooting. I mean, it's not something that you can really teach very well. You can teach concepts, you can sort of teach methods, but at the end of the day, I mean, when you walk into a problem, when you walk into something that's you're like, hey, come troubleshoot this.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people really just, I mean, they walk into it and they go, wow, it's this big.
Mm-hmm.
Where do I start? How do I get into it? Where do I go? What do I do? And I think that's really where people, it's from just the onset. People are just like, I'm so overwhelmed. And they almost shut down sometimes. And then they just go, and then they just stop.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, you know, we saw last webinar when we had Peter on and we were looking at the packets. It's very overwhelming because it's such a highly technical, highly challenging thing, because the reality is, while it's two real symptoms, you know, it's either slow internet or the slow web-based application can't access it, or connectivity issues. While the symptoms realistically are very small in number, it could be a dozen of anything. Like, it could be interference, it could be DNS, it could be DHCP. I mean, there could be so many issues that cause those two symptoms, right? And to your point, I think that's why it can be overwhelming. So understanding and knowing where to start is a huge thing. So let's talk about that, Jim. So you obviously have managed a lot of very large networks. So let's talk about, where do you start and your process?
You know, so this is actually a big topic for me. And I don't know if the people listening in have heard about the ECSE troubleshooting course, which I
So
think
glad you said that.
That wasn't a product placement, folks. No.
Thanks, Jim.
I mean, they didn't pay me. I mean, so this is the second time I've plugged an Ekahau product. The first time I was on, I plugged the Eka cookie, which I don't know why, but it just didn't take off anywhere. It didn't. It sort of was a one and done thing, I guess. But anyway, you know, the ECSE troubleshooting, you know, was something that I ended up, I don't want to say consulted on, but I sort of helped with a little bit. And part of it was asking the right question at the right time, because
Yes.
a lot of times what happens is, you know, when you walk into it and it's really big and you go, where do I start? You know, it's always, you start asking, you have to ask the right questions at the right time to the right person. And if you don't, you'll end up running off on some wild tangent. And 2 days later, you come back and go, oh, well, that wasn't the problem at all. You know, and so for me, you know, it comes down to what we were talking, you know, the previous slide was talking about design, and, you know, it all comes down to a good design. I personally believe that a good design also includes that post-installation validation survey, where
Absolutely.
you definitely walk, I mean, you walk the entire space, you get the survey, you come back, you look at it and you go, is there any problems? Do we need to fix it? And so that's part of what that survey is good for. But the second thing, and yes, I said survey, I can't remember who, anyway, the second thing that post-installation validation RF walking gathering survey thing is good for is it creates a benchmark. It creates a thing that says, hey, this is what the network looked like when it was working well. When everybody was happy, this is what it looked like. And so when you start to troubleshoot, that's the first thing you go back to, and you go, hey, you know, let's look at this. And we go, can we find something really quick? You know, you're like, oh, you know, this AP was on this channel, this AP was on this channel. And then you look and you go, wait a second, you know, the areas where these people were complaining from, you know, what is the complaint with those areas where they come from? None of those channel settings match anymore. And so you go, hey, there's a starting point that we can start from. And whether you go do, you know, packet captures like Peter will like to do, or if you're like, you know, Keith Parsons' first step is, hey, I'm going to take out my sidekick. I'm going to do a, you know, investigative survey in that area. He might not do the whole building, but if it's like, oh, everybody over on the East Wing is complaining, he'll go over and he'll do the survey on the East Wing and come back, and then he'll compare the two. And so it's all about asking that question and finding out, you know, where exactly is the problem, and can we compare it to what we had in the, you know, when the system was working well.
So it's almost like you're saying is that, you know, just like, you know, always have that baseline, right? You knew what it was, you have a baseline, and then you can go back and go, okay, now we can see what's changed, or something else is happening.
And that's one of the exercises in the troubleshooting course is asking that right question, because a lot of times what I found, and this is something I learned back when I was doing public safety two-way radios, is
Mhm.
I took a course, and it was all about troubleshooting. They had a live system, and they would literally hand you a trouble ticket that came into TAC, and they'd be like, "Here's the trouble ticket that we got. Go figure it out." And the cool thing about it is they would only let you ask 5 questions when you got the trouble ticket,
Mhm.
because they were like most of the time end users don't know any of the technical details that you're looking for. And if you ask them more than 5 questions, they get angry at you and go, how am I supposed to know all this stuff? You're hired to fix it. Come in and fix it and leave me alone. And you can really sour that relationship with the one person or people that you need this information from. So you got to start by asking the right questions. And we spent a week doing nothing but trying to figure out what is the right question to ask. And
Mhm.
sometimes the only question that you can ask is, you know, when did you first notice a problem?
Yeah.
And that is always, I mean, that is generally the first question is that I ask anybody
Mhm.
is, when did you first notice that it wasn't working the way you wanted it to work? Because then that gives you a starting point. At that point, you go, okay, timeline is right here. So
Mhm.
everything before that we know is good. Everything past that is bad. And we can start looking at logs and whatever, but it's whatever you feel comfortable with going in and doing. But
Right.
asking that initial question, and sometimes that's the only thing that you need to know, because you know, you can't ask an end user, well, what channel were you on? Or what was your MCS?
Mhm.
Were you an MCS one? Were you an MCS zero? I mean, they don't know
Don't
this
know.
stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's really what it's all about is finding that point where you can jump in and you can start.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the things. So understanding, you trying to identify it, and as you're asking clarifying questions to identify what the problem is, let's talk about some of the things that can go wrong, how you identify it, and how you would go about fixing it. Let's talk about RF issues first. Because all of that we can do in less than an hour here on a
Right.
webinar, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, this is a little topic.
Just a little bit. Let's just talk about some of the generalities, and then we'll look at some case specific things.
So, an RF issue, and this is the one thing and this goes back to what Stu started with at the beginning, was when I brought that Field Fox to WLPC, it wasn't because I was trying to show off. It wasn't because I was trying to do anything. The question came up because a lot of people knew that I had this Field Fox. They knew that I had this really high-end spectrum analyzer. It was an RF spectrum analyzer. I think it went from 50 kilohertz to 6 gigahertz.
Mhm.
And so people always wanted to know, should I get that analyzer? And so I brought it to WLPC not to show off, what my Field Fox could do, but to show off what the Sidekick could do. And so anytime you're dealing with RF issues, CCI, ACI, airtime utilization, non-Wi-Fi interference, channel, all these things that, could happen, breaking out the Sidekick and the real-time frequency monitor. Is that the monitor? I just know it's
Mhm.
RFTM.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
You got it.
that still cracks me up. So you break that out, and then you just start looking at it, and the thing that I loved about it that I showed with when I compare the two side by side, is that the Sidekick was so much easier to run if you didn't work in the spectrum analyzer stuff all the time. The problem with the Field Fox and those high-end analyzers that you see in the radio world is if
Mhm.
you don't spend a lot of time working on them, it's really, really hard to zoom in, to dial in, and get it the way configured you want it. You want it to configure. Whereas the Sidekick is literally plug and play. I mean, you plug it in, wait for the thing to pop up in the window, and you go click, 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 and then you can
Mhm.
zoom in. And now you're starting to look at that stuff. And it's so good at identifying all of the different issues that you might have just by looking at that. And so that's where, if it's an RF issue, that's where you start. You grab your Sidekick, you fire that thing up, you go to wherever they're complaining. And the thing is I think a lot of people don't understand a lot. I mean, and
Mhm.
is it doing spectrum analyzer work is a
Mhm.
long-term thing. It's not a quick and easy thing where you go in and you go, oh, we're going to capture a client association, and then we're going to go back to the office and put our feet up and break it down. I mean, sometimes you can be you have to spend a lot of time in an area looking for that RF issue to pop up. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not, but you got to understand that there is going to be some time involved when you're chasing down RF issues.
And we got some examples of that coming up a little later.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that's really awesome about the Sidekick. And I say that as an employee, but somebody who's actually used it, is because it is so fast. Hey, don't laugh, Jim. Because it's so fast, it can scan the channels. It can catch those frequency hopping, interferences, and it captures it so you can see it and figure out where the problem is and what's happening. And that's, I think, one of the really, really awesome advantages to the Sidekick.
Well,
and so, little sneak peek, folks. Think about your favorite thing about the Sidekick, or what you think is one of the biggest benefits of the Sidekick, because that might come into play here for some interaction here in a little bit. So think about that.
yeah, I got my phone ready. No, I was laughing at Stu, who managed to hang up his Sidekick.
Oh yeah, because I've got it as a product placement. Yeah, I've got it right here on a pole. So it's a Sidekick on a stick. How about that?
Awesome.
Hey, maybe that's a new product.
That's a new one, right? Yeah.
Exactly,
So
right.
yeah, I know you touch a really kind of interesting spot. Is like, as there's no need for the extra nerd knobs or the geek knobs that we need, right? It does its job. It goes through and understands it. And then the device that you were using, that you were talking about there, Jim, was more of a that's something like, that goes really into the deeper weeds, I guess you want to say, is, but that covers a completely gambit of different spectrum, right? That's a huge, super wide range. That's something like maybe an FCC person would be going around with, right?
That's exactly what they go around with. And the problem is it's really cool. And you can zoom in. You can zoom in to have it's called the resolution bandwidth on that thing. You could zoom into, we'd set it for like 25 kilohertz wide. So when we talk about like what's 1 RU, or even the sweep on the Sidekick is 37 kilohertz. Is that? I think it's 37 kilohertz. I don't remember the
39 resolution, right?
Yeah. And so, but that Sidekick, or not the Sidekick, but the Field Fox could go even tighter. And the problem is, I mean, it's great when you're dealing with channels that are 12 and a half kilohertz wide, but in Wi-Fi, it makes no sense. And so that's kind of what I was showing is the fact that when you're doing spectrum analysis work, and, the Sidekick is actually a better tool for the Wi-Fi professional. And the Field Fox, while it's really cool and it can do a lot of cool stuff, it costs, gobs load more money. And if you don't literally work in it every single day, it can take you hours just to go, hey, I want to look at traffic on channel 36 that's 20 megahertz wide. I mean, and so at that point you're wasting time sitting there, where it's all back to the plug and play functionality to go in and start looking at that stuff. And when we get to the non-Wi-Fi interference here in a second, it adds that sort of that Wi-Fi overlay onto it that a normal spectrum analyzer doesn't. Because you can be like, oh, here's the channel, so you can have the channel width. Oh, here's channel 36, and then this guy pops up right, in the upper third or whatever. A normal spectrum analyzer doesn't give you that. You have to just know that stuff inherently. There's no channel numbers. There's no spectral overlay on it. None of that stuff exists. And so you can spend a lot of extra money to get a really, really cool tool that is not going to be as useful. So, and unfortunately the Brinks truck, the truck of full of cash didn't make it to my door. So I'm still waiting on that. So if anybody knows, send it over.
It's still at my house.
Oh, yeah. Give it up, Tony.
All right. So let's talk about some upper layer protocol challenges that can go wrong. Some of those things. And how do you diagnose it? How do you figure out that that's what it is? And then what steps can you do to fix that?
Well, unfortunately, spectrum analysis doesn't help you with the upper layer protocols. What I look at, and what I try to remind people all the time, is that you have to in Wi-Fi, you have to make sure that those first layers are are there and they're solid, because if they're not, it doesn't matter about the DHCP, DNS, captive portals, any of those other things. And, one of the things I liked about the troubleshooting course, and here's another plug, is I got this handy dandy chart right here.
From our friend Keith Parsons. That is, yes.
Yes. And I'm pretty sure he showed that before. So I don't feel bad showing it. I don't feel bad showing it now, but those upper layer protocols, you have to go and you can use other things. You can use wireless capture, like Peter likes to do. Peter's so good at it. He'll be like, oh yeah, yes, that's the elaborated napkin, Michael. But Peter will go in and he'll be like, oh yeah, I can do it. He's so good at it. He's the magician. He'll go in and use his PCAP skills to even understand the RF issues. And one of the things I found interesting when I took the troubleshooting course, and I was in a train the trainer course actually, and everybody that was in the class, they would get to one of the modules at the end, sort of like the test, and everybody would attack the issue differently based on what they felt the most comfortable with. And so those upper layer protocols, while you can't find it from an RF side, you do have to start going in and understanding, okay, now we got to do PCAP. And that's where I think, when you start talking about, some of the value of some of the certifications is this idea of being able to go, I got to do RF, I got to do PCAP. And then, you might have to go to, even, go into the DHCP servers, go into the captive portals, find out there's a lot of other things, but that's where you need to have another tool in your tool belt to say, what am I missing?
It's like a process of elimination, right?
It is.
You got to check certain things. Okay.
Right.
Is it the DNS, the DHCP? Well, yes and no, but it's actually maybe an RF interference that's causing the interruption between me receiving something, right? So yes, and that works hand in hand, process of elimination for sure.
But one of the things that is taught in the class, and Keith harps on this more times than I care to admit, sorry, Keith, is like DHCP. If you get a DHCP, if you get an address, it's not a Wi-Fi problem. If you get DNS, it's not a Wi-Fi problem. There's all these things that can stop the problem. That it's funny because people always go, oh yeah, everybody blames DNS and they complain about being sysadmins and stuff like that. And I'm like, you want to really get blamed? Be a Wi-Fi person, because somebody shuts down a website out in the world and it's a Wi-Fi problem. And they're like, well, I can't get to my website. And you go, well, yeah, it's parked, or, it's like, but it's still a Wi-Fi problem. Everything's a Wi-Fi problem. And so being able to, do that troubleshooting and be able to come out and show, hey, RF is good. It's something else. And then you can start pushing them and helping them along to say, there's a routing problem between Denver and San Francisco. It's a Wi-Fi problem. No, it's not.
That's a whole other problem, right?
Yeah, but it still gets blamed on Wi-Fi, right? I mean, was it earlier? Was it earlier this week when Teams went down and people were like, oh yeah, it's a Wi-Fi problem? No, it's not. Teams went down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the challenges. And so one of the things that we're doing as we work through these webinars, and yes, folks, a recording will be available, and for everybody post this, and all our previous webinar recordings are available on our website.
Yeah, sorry about that. That was the housekeeping thing that I got too excited because of our guest.
we work through some of these challenges to help give folks a place to start. And I think that's one of the things. So let's jump right into looking at some examples, because I want to make sure we have some time. So Stu, what are we looking at here? What was the interference that we saw? And I mean, I know the label says video camera, but how, walk us through what was occurring that led you to create this, or to identify it and
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so what the idea of this was actually doing a survey, and during the survey, just to kind of figure out where APs were, the Sidekick automatically figured out, hey, by the way, there's some interference. We detected it while we were actually doing the scan. So as we were doing that, I should say survey of the Spectrum Hotel, right? And as we go through the Spectrum Hotel, we're finding out, okay, what's happening. And the Sidekick was actually able to identify and trilaterate or locate exactly where that interference was. So the more, and when I looked at it right away, I'm like, oh, wow, there's some more interference. This gave me the opportunity to go, okay, So one of two things, I can go back and survey, if I can, individual rooms to try to locate it, with a deeper accuracy, or I can kind of go and take a quick look on the recorded data that I captured on the spec hand. And so we'll see that in the next part is how we're able to kind of classify that, right? So you're seeing as a classified as a camera, but what's important here is we'll see on the next slide is that you're going to see.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
It's my bad, y'all.
that was my subtle hint. What you're going to see on the next slide is we see it as a blip. Now that blip showed up for probably about I would say 10 seconds. But look what happened, and Jim can see this as well, is that right there, the key thing is the channel utilization at 83% on channel 104. And so when you look at that, you're like, oh, wow, what's happening, right? And then when you go
so you go from this
and
it allows you to look at it through the RTFM to see this.
That's right. Yep. So then we look deeper, and then we see the channel utilization of the hit at that point in time. And what Ekahau allows us to do is we can zoom in on that channel group, right? So now we can get even a little more detail of what of an impact that has. It's at 83% channel utilization. The duty cycle is going to be pretty high, right? And then you're going to look at, okay, hey, how long is it? And then you can watch the playback and then say, okay, was it a concern? Because Jim, you could speak to this where you'd say, what, in spectrum analysis, sometimes the blips happen for a second, a minute, and at 10 minutes, right? Depending. And a lot of times you just don't see it, right? And sometimes the APs don't even catch it.
Yeah. And that's kind of, what I was alluding to about, when you're doing this type of work, it's hard because you do end up sitting there, and we've actually done some RF work where it took us days to catch it. And, we had to do some really crazy stuff because nobody was going to sit there and stare at a screen for 2.5 days before that interference thing finally popped up. And so it's tough. It's hard. And I think to Stu's point, you kind of have to start to ask yourself is, if it's going to take you that long to try to track down that video camera. And the cool thing about it is, the Ekahau interference detection platform isn't just, the one video camera. I mean, it can detect a lot of different stuff, and it will flag it, and it will be like, hey, we think that this spectral mask kind of matches this. And so then it gives you a sort of an area to go. But I mean, I think the one thing I want to kind of point out to everybody is there's some intelligence in this reporting, but there's also a little bit of guessing too. It's kind of like, it's because if you notice, when you look at the white dash on the red box, it doesn't quite match up, but it's kind of, so video camera is probably your likely culprit, but it could be something else too. And so, I mean, it's just, but if it only pops up once a day for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and you happen to be walking through that area when you were doing your survey and you caught it just because the timing was right, the stars aligned, you can't just look at it, because one thing to understand about it, I mean, it's your that RF information that's stored is only good for that time frame. You have to go back, and understand what's happening in the moment, not just, oh, this happened one time. And, so getting that bigger picture is also, a skill set that you have to learn to know and understand when you're doing RF troubleshooting. But,
and I think oh, go ahead, Jim.
I was going to say, one thing I'm going to bring up is what I like is way over there in the corner, right there,
way down there. Yeah.
Way down there. Look, the shelf took up a lot of space. That's my Ekahau spectrum interference chart.
And what that is some of the most common interferences that you'll see. And that's, and folks, we will post that accompanied with the webinar after the fact, and make sure that folks can see that. But it's what things can cause interference most commonly in an enterprise environment, right? So from microwaves to lapel mics that folks are using for interviewing or doing a lot of video recording, to webcams, video cams, TVs that are mounted that are broadcasting SSIDs. It could be any number of things, right? and it's the most common interference things. And to Jim's point, nothing, you can't always see what the most perfect, it may not always have this perfect identification of the spectral mass of what it looks like, but based on what it is, this is, algorithm's best calculation of what the interference possibly could be on your network.
And I think it's also important to know that each device, like this video camera here, it's in 5 gigahertz, but that is roughly the shape and the pattern that you would see. And then it's also important to remember that each of those hardware devices are using, a ton of different chipsets, and they may not be finely as tuned. And so they'll show up slightly different, right? So this is where Jim talks about, like, it's kind of it's a learning process, right? Is that you'll learn it. At Ekahau, we tried our best, and our smart engineers in Helsinki, they love this stuff, right? And they're trying to get even better and better after each version.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, we'll see it in the chat sometimes when somebody's like, hey, I found this. And so the first thing I do is I jump up from my desk and I run over.
Jim runs over to his poster.
I run back and I look at it and I go, well, it's kind of like this. And it's like, and then I run over
and I check it. Yeah.
And then I run back and I go, yeah, it's not on there.
It's not on there. Yeah.
So anyway, I think we're about as off track as we could be, but anyway.
No, but I think that's one of the things that's really important to understand is there are tools, and we do here at Ekahau have things that will help folks identify what it is. But let's look at some of those live examples. But before we do that, I have another poll question for you guys. So let me get that for you. We'll launch that right here. From the choices below, what is the biggest benefit of using a sidekick? Speed, accuracy, mobility, or D, all of the above? Stu, there we go. Cue my Jeopardy music. I know what I would answer. Folks, hope you're thinking about that. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll give just another couple minutes here, or a couple seconds here on that. All right.
So, I mean, it's great. I love the kind of seeing the, how people are answering this question, right? It's, but...
All right, well, let's go ahead and look at those results. Most of the folks think it's all of the above. Can't just choose one, right? That's, I think, one of the exciting things. But folks, one of the things that we're going to do here, so we have had a lot of people asking questions about how do you win, or how do you get the sidekick shirt, right? Stu, be our model for us here for just a minute. The Stu is wearing our wonderful sidekick shirt here. And so what we are going to do, folks.
I'm not a good model. I got to keep my gauge up.
And what we are going to do here is, who wants to win a sidekick shirt? For the first 25 people right now who tweet sidekick shirt, you have to tag Ekahau, use the hashtag EkaSidekick.
That's right.
Hashtag, and tweet your favorite benefit of the sidekick. Will be the first 25 people will win a sidekick shirt.
And you need all three.
Not
you need to do all three. Not off the one off my back.
You have to do all three things.
But now, and as a treat, when we do, and whoever gets these sidekick shirts, I will be happy to sign each one of them if we see each other in person again at an event.
Awesome.
Hey, Tony, this is Abhishek. Am I
going
to have to sign up for one of these or not? I'm going to be an exception, I think.
Ooh, they already told one offline.
They told me I wasn't eligible, so.
No, I would do.
Awesome.
Folks, that was Abhishek. He's our man behind the curtain there. Abhishek. Man behind the curtain.
I know everybody's trying to get, everybody wants a sidekick shirt. They're pretty awesome. But folks, let's go ahead and move through, because we do have some really fun and exciting things left that we want to make sure we get through. So we are going to take a live look at some of the interferences that Jim and Stu referenced in our webinar. And so let's go ahead and take a look at this. So
let's roll the clip.
What are we? Yeah, let's roll the clip and see what we're looking at.
He's gonna run back over there.
Run and check his.
So what we're seeing here is this is an actual, live view. And what we did was kind of wanted to see so what was happening in this environment. And you can see there's a bunch of different things happening. So on 2.4 gigahertz, you're seeing the cameras going back and forth. But what's interesting here is that you're starting to see what you're seeing is the actual awesome resolution that the Sidekick gives you. But what you're seeing is you want to be see is, well, is it affecting the entire network? Is the channel utilization high? And what other devices could be coming into play, right? So this is where we wanted to kind of, see is that, and look at how time has passed and now it's gone, right? And so in that short, 30 seconds we were talking, now it's no longer a problem. And it was a blip. And then a service ticket was placed, Jim goes on site, oh, well, there's nothing to see here, right?
Yeah.
Then you got to sit around and maybe kind of correlate time, right, of when it happened again.
And somebody put this in the comments or the chat, and I wish I could scroll back and find it, but they said that, that's one of the biggest problems with video cameras is a lot of these are motion detect, try to conserve battery. And so it doesn't happen until it detects motion, and so what do you do then? You just hire a bunch of people to run through every, hallway or whatever. I don't know.
That's when you get your Sidekick mounted on a Roomba.
Yeah.
And you do it on the robots.
Don't get me started. I've got a Roomba. It's one thing I'm working on to see how we can do that. So
yeah. Yes. Interns.
Yes, that's right. And that's kind of a cool thing is, we're not only just seeing, in this particular example here, as what it was, we can run the playback again just quickly, but it's, as for those folks that might have missed it there, Tawny, but it's if what we're seeing here is we're detecting the APs that are in there. We're seeing we've got AX access points. We're seeing, that just any interference that might come into play, right?
Yeah.
And yes, one of the questions was, can you see rogue APs? Well, remember, it's another AP. And yes, you're going to see that. And that's what the Sidekick does see that. And you can see it here on the screen, right? You're seeing other devices in the environment for sure.
Well, let's look at another one here as we get going.
Oh, this.
So we see video camera video camera coming, but then oh wait, it is covering all the channels. So it's not just covering 1, 6, and 11. It's covering it's all of the channels. Yeah.
And I think on this one here, so if we go to the next video, on the next one, I think because we know how Zoom it does a this is the cool one. So we hold right here. So this is a kind of a cool thing that I captured, and where we were actually seeing, generic frequency hopping across the band, right? So you're seeing it there, you're seeing it cover that whole place there. And I actually even changed the view because I wanted to see what no interferers were and what interferers were. So I wanted to
play that again so we can
play that again. Yeah, let's put it on repeat there. So notice there, you've got the white lines in the background that are actually kind of, they're kind of giving you that full screen. So the entire spectrum is obliterated at that point. Well, not quite. It's getting there, right? It's hey, there's some things happening here. We saw some microphone kick up there, generic frequency, and it's going to dive down into kind of, where's that little video camera, or is there a signal generator? Like you can see on channel 2 there. That was created by a signal generator, I think a Wi-Fi metrics type signal generator to kind of simulate, issues that you could have, right?
And folks, just to clarify some of the questions and stuff. So when you see interference like this happening right here on channel 2, what that's telling you is that like the black to red is that there's a lot of interference occurring on there right now. And so when you're looking at this red and you see this item here, and then you see here on channel 2, there is some interference happening that could be very impactful on your network.
So when you say a lot, do you want to clarify that? Or do you want me to?
You can clarify that, Jim.
So when she says a lot, what she's talking about is the amount of time. So it's the amplitude or the power there is the y-axis on the left. And so what we're seeing is that wherever Stu was when he captured this, that whatever's sitting right there on channel 2 at probably 2 megahertz wide, that was at a neg 30. But it's the duration, the amount of time that the Sidekick saw it was almost a constant signal. Whereas when you go to the red up around channel 9, that means it's pretty constant. It's a lot more time, but it's not as, it's not as much as the black. And then as you start going down your color scale, it's what we're looking at from the color perspective is the amount of time that signal is seen, and then the amplitude is how high it is. So that's how if you were going to try to triangulate, basically what you do is you walk around with this and you go, oh, I want to go find that. So you figure out where I was when I took that, and then you take the sidekick and you just keep walking around. And you can use what's called a body fade technique, where you actually take the sidekick, instead of having it on your side, put it almost in front of you, so your body acts as an attenuator. And Lee Badman actually wrote a blog about this. It's really good. And you use what's called body fading to then turn. So you stand there and you turn, and you watch until that thing gets about 3 dB higher, because your body's about 3 dB, and then you can go hunt them down that way. And so that's how you would find it but what we're looking at is the duration of time it's transmitting.
Yeah, because neg 30 is that's pretty powerful, right?
You got to be pretty close. Yeah. It's not going to, if you knew where you were when this specific image was taken, it gives you a good idea that it's still going to be there, because it's just there all the time. Where some of those video cameras, they'll go red and they can, and then they kind of tail off a little bit. So, and your body's about 3 dB. I mean, really depends. I'm probably 4, maybe 5 now. It's year a quarter.
It just depends.
It depends.
It depends.
But you will see it as you will see the signal go up and down as you turn with it up against your body.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we go into the next type of, I think we go to the next slide there, Tony. I think what I did is I wanted to take a different point of, we're after this one here. Yeah. So this one here, this one's a lot of fun. Now, normally we don't. Yeah,
we say a lot of fun.
Yeah. So when you see the dark and the black area and the red, that's where the channel utilization is getting pegged, right? It's there's nobody can talk on those channels. It's in that area there that's just too busy. It's overused, right? I mean, when you look at that, Jim, what does that scream to you? That just screams
screams run away.
Right?
Someone's doing a speed test.
God. I mean, that's
just you're covering from 3 to probably 14.
There's a lot going on in here.
Yeah.
I mean, so the problem that I'm seeing is, the only advantage you have at this point is the fact that it is low enough. So so wherever you were, it's going to be a little bit farther away, because it's seeing it down at a neg 90 is about where that line is.
I'm going to run it again so we can watch.
Oh, so
I shortened the clip. I didn't want to make it too long.
Oh yeah.
But we'll just do a replay of this one.
That almost, God, that's just, I'd have to run over to my chart again, and we're running out of time. I can't do that. My legs are tired. Yeah, that's just a nasty, nasty beast.
Right. And this can be caused by a number of issues. You can't maybe not track it down, but when you see this live, whether you're seeing it here in the RTFM viewer, or you're going to see it on the Analyzer app, and you see this live, this is a huge kind of eye opener. Whoa, something's happening. There's a device that's kind of gone wonky, and it could be a bad radio, could be an antenna, it could be something that's just way overpowered, right? It could be a microwave that's gone array, right?
Could be a microwave. I don't think it's a radio, because unless the radio went non-linear somehow.
Or it could be something like a jammer, right? It's just there's enough in there to flood it, right?
Yeah, and the only reason I didn't say a jammer first was because it wasn't occupying the first.
That's right. Yeah.
It's not.
And it's also based on where I was, and so it looks like as I'd moved closer to it, then it would start to increase the screen, and then it also. But I was pretty far away enough from this device when it happened.
But
so in this
David
kind of
said
scenario,
wafer manufacturing equipment saturates channels 5 to 8 at 100% and 2.4 gigahertz. So it could be, but you'd know that if you were around a wafer manufacturing plant. But that's where having that understanding of because I haven't been in a wafer manufacturing plant, but if I ever do, I'll go, hey, David said something about that, so I need to go back.
Right. And I've seen DC motors off of refrigeration units in
Yep.
hospitals do something similar. And where there's something
Magnetic
wrong with the
interference.
motor, it's just off on its magnet. What the correct term is magneto, or it's off, and it creates this issue. Now, strangely, funny enough, I plan to do another capture of my model railway equipment because they used miniature DC motors. And funny enough, when those motors are off, the magnet's off, they've worn up, that you will see something really weird. So that's something I got to capture at some point with my sidekick. That's a whole other webinar.
Yeah. And I think, folks, one of the things, some of the questions rolling in, one of the things that you can do if this is an environment and you're walking around and this is the result that you get, you're going to have to continue to walk until you can find exactly where that is so that you can see it. And you're going to have to keep walking to try to get closer, to try to find it, because that's how you're going to be able to identify what the heck it is. Because the reality is, there are so many things now that have chips in them that are Wi-Fi enabled that can cause interference that you may not necessarily know what it was. Somebody could have brought something from home that's a rogue device that's creating that kind of impact. It could be any number of things. And so if it's not one of the most common interferences that you experience in enterprise, the reality is you're going to have to just keep walking until you find it.
Absolutely.
So, so the last thing I want to point out here is the waterfall on the left. And that's when you're doing RF. No, on the far left.
Oh, here. Sorry. Yes. The
waterfall.
Yes. Here.
That,
so there's two there. Sorry. I put two on the screen.
I was like, wait.
Yeah. So what we're looking at is this shows it over time, and it gives you an idea, so it doesn't have, it's not happening all the time. You have to,
you're going to dive into it and go back. And so play back for it. Yeah.
But that's a very, this is an interesting capture right here, because it shows, at one point, what about 7.5 minutes previous, it covered the whole thing. And so it kind of shrunk.
Yeah.
So notice that. So, it's all about doing detective work, hey, let's look at, it took up the whole thing. And maybe it's as I was walking away, the impact got less, because when you look at 4 minutes, is that 4 minutes or 4 seconds? The duration's 5. Anyway, you can see that when we first started capturing, it was, across the whole band. And then at -6, it went to half. And then at -4, it just went down to that one channel. So,
oops, sorry, slides are jumping on me.
No, so it's another tool to look at right here to say, oh yeah, look at that. So if knowing how to interpret the tools is really handy.
And I got one more. That's actually a lot of fun.
The
next one here, we got this is the last one, right, Tony? I think this is the last one.
It is. This is the last one.
So folks, as you know, I love to make in my my environment here. I've got my network. I'm a fan of Smallville. You'll see up there, but we're gonna, as we're watching the new Superman and Lois, we put the popcorn on, right? And so right now we're seeing popcorn being made, so microwave I can watch oven. Superman and Lois. No plug for that show right now, but that's just what I'm doing.
Stu.
Anyways, do we need to start a GoFundMe to get you a new microwave?
Yes, and actually that is happening. So a new one is on order. But what you're seeing there, folks, that is a microwave. And this one actually happens to be a Panasonic. I think it's going to come back in a minute, but there we go. We'll just replay it. But you can see my AP is on channel 11, right? It's getting ready, and then all of a sudden the microwave kicks in.
Yep.
Boom. Right. So my AP is doing some download. It was buffering Netflix at that time, I think, and then all of a sudden, boom. Now we have this issue. So this is things that happen, right? And they could happen in lunchrooms, break rooms, all the time. And a lot of times, APs. Well, you notice that the AP's gone away there. So you notice that you'll see the pink line there. That's so the APs are now going off channel, coming back on, right? Because they're trying to understand that, whoa, there's too much going on. We'll go off channel and go to another one, right? But you can see how the signal can be completely obliterated, right? And then, nobody can do anything, right? Clients lose disconnection.
Yeah.
Yes. Thanks, Rafael. And that's how movie night at Stu's was ruined, right? Yeah.
But, but this also goes back to my first point about asking the right question at the right time. To the right people, so microwaves are usually easy to detect even without any of the, reporting from your infrastructure, because you just say, when do you notice the problem? Oh, I noticed it at lunch, and it's always around the break room. And you go, I mean, at that point,
It's a
you know,
microwave. Yeah.
no offense, you really don't need a sidekick. You go, how about we go buy you some new microwaves? Because my bill is going to be more than your new microwaves. So
Yeah, and I think
that's where asking that question comes in is critical.
yeah, it's at being able to ask the right questions and just getting in to find out, because it takes practice. Look at what the most common interferences are, and if it doesn't meet if the spectral mask doesn't look like that, then that's where you're going to have to do some additional investigation and then look and continue walking and look at when it's occurring and continue to ask those questions of the user so that you can really be able to troubleshoot and diagnose what the problem is. So
Absolutely.
Jim, thank you so much. We're getting close to the top of the hour. Any final thoughts for folks? And by the way, Jim is a very active member in the community on Twitter. If you have a question you need that you didn't get answered, sorry, we don't get to all of the questions, but we're volunteering Jim to answer those and field any questions on Twitter. Feel free to tweet at him. And for those of you, we captured the 25 shirt winners. I don't know who they are yet, but we will be reaching out to you. So stay tuned for that. But Jim, as we wrap up here, any final thoughts, anything for folks who are struggling with identifying a spectral mask? What would you recommend? What would you suggest?
All right. So I'm going to steal some of your time and I'm going to answer some of the questions because I think they're good questions and I'd like to answer them live.
That's fine. Please.
So John Davis asked, can you explain why a lower resolution bandwidth is better for a spectrum analyzer? Twitter would take me about 18 tweets, so I'm going to do it here real quick. The resolution bandwidth, what it does is instead of having your spec and scan, 600 megahertz worth of channel or whatever, what you do is you say, hey, I want to only scan just a smaller resolution, my bandwidth. I only want to scan 20 megahertz, or I want to scan 50 kilohertz or whatever. And when you tighten that thing down, what happens is it scans faster. So you're like, because instead of having to scan the whole band, you're saying, I only want to scan just a little bit. So that's why you'd go in really tight. The problem is, you don't need to go less than 39 kilohertz with one RU. The other one I want to talk about is the spectral signature of LTE. Oliver just asked this, and I wanted to answer this live because of one thing. Wi-Fi 6 and OFDMA was 100% borrowed from LTE. The idea of having little RUs assigned to each client is how LTE works. So I have no problems with Wi-Fi 6 because I knew they stole it from LTE, and LTE's been doing it for how many years? And so what you'll see if you have an LTE is you'll actually see it'll look like OFDMA, because instead of trying to come up with time or beamforming or anything else like that, OFDMA takes the 20 megahertz wide channel that you may or may not need to get your weather app updated, and it says, hey, we're gonna break that down into smaller chunks of frequency. So it does a frequency division. It says you're gonna get a little chunk, you're gonna get a little chunk, and so an LTE signature will look like that. And the other one was intermittent sources. I think we covered that. You just got to spend time. And when I was doing this back in the radio world, we would actually we got somebody to write us a custom computer program that would sit there and monitor for days and days and days and days. And then when it caught a signature above a certain level, it would then record it, kind of like a motion detecting camera. That's expensive stuff. So you either find somebody that can do really, really good computer work, or you spend your time sitting there. But yes, I am on Twitter at Wireless Jim P, and I have some. Yeah, you missed it. It's not at Wireless Jim. It's at Wireless Jim P.
Oh, my bad. Sorry.
And and I also have a blog where I
do a live edit.
I talk about ECSE troubleshooting, and I talk about asking the right questions. So
yes, sorry, correct. Wireless Jim P, folks. Jim Palmer.
Yes.
Just add the P at the end.
Yes.
Sorry. But in wrapping up, Jim, any final thoughts, suggestions for folks? Sorry about that.
Don't get discouraged, because again, I spent 20 years looking at spectrum analyzers and service monitors and a bunch of radio stuff. So don't get discouraged if you look at it and you're just like, holy cow, this is beyond me. Don't get discouraged. Because everybody takes time. I can't look at a PCAP the way that Peter McKenzie can. and that's fine. So don't get discouraged. And if just continue continue learning. And if you have questions, if you have problems, reach out, because if it's not me, somebody else will jump in there and can answer your questions for you. So that's my one advice, is don't get discouraged, and it just takes time. And unfortunately, you can't accelerate time, at least not yet.
Awesome. I might need to attach my license plate for that, right? Out of time.
All right, folks. So I don't know who the t-shirt winners are. So if you were one of the first 25 to tweet, we will let you know. We will be reaching out after the webinar. But thank you, Jim. That was absolutely fantastic. And it's absolutely great advice. Some of us have more knowledge about things than others, like Peter about PCAP. Jim, you obviously in RF is a phenomenal individual. It just takes time, to your point, and that is fantastic advice. Don't give up and just keep working through it.
Yep. Absolutely.
And with that,
and just to close off there,
yes,
before we kid out, right on the slide here, folks, we got some quick links here as well. We should be able to post those in the chat. Usually we have that on standby there, but it's if you're looking to know a little bit more about Ekahau, please check out our website. Especially if you are looking at maybe scheduling a demo. You'll most likely get a demo with myself or Abhishek, and then you can have some fun, right? You get get to interact with us.
Yes.
Also, what's really cool is we offer a great training program. And to top it off is, if you have a feature request, reach out to the ekahau.uservoice.com. So if you're looking for something to kind of add, and you think that might be a cool feature that we could put in on an upcoming release, get it in there. Let's get your friends and to upvote that, and our product team looks at that closely.
Yeah, and there were a lot of the questions that came through, I think, today were specific about feature requests, and so Stu, using user voices is the best way to do that,
right? Yeah, and everyone's got eyes on it, and then we can see what we're looking at, and then lastly, obviously, is looking for a great webinar topic, reach out to us, right? We love to hear back from you. I'm your sidekick, Stu, joined by the ever so talented my host Tawny, and special guest Jim. Thank you very much, folks.
One final thing.
There's always one
register
more thing.
for Wi-Fi Day. We will have more information out, but register for Wi-Fi Day. Registration is now open. We have another, we'll be revealing the speakers soon, so make sure you do register for Wi-Fi Day. That will be May the 20th. So we're really excited about that. Wi-Fi Day, this will be the second year we've hosted this. It's our virtual event, one-day event, talking about all things wireless. So make sure you register. You can do so on our website. There are links.
And there's a link in the chat ready to go. Thank you very much,
link in the chat right now. wifi.ekahau.com/wi-fi/day.
Glad I didn't have to go find that.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everybody. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day, evening, night, morning, and all of the above.